And here we go.
Good morning, everyone. We have folks coming in quickly. This is so exciting. I want to welcome you all this morning. My name is Kathy Knight, and I am the state director for our state association, the Washington Association of Area Agencies on Aging. If you ever hear W4A, that's us. We are so thrilled to welcome you to our first virtual W4A staff development event. And we're going to put everybody on mute. That was probably one of the first things I wanted to say. Please make sure you're on mute for the time being. We're going to have a great opportunity today. I'm honored and thrilled that I will be introducing our guest speaker. And I'll just do that. I think I'll get that started. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Laura Dernoot Lipsky. I get that name right. That's probably the hardest part, Laura. I bet you have that happen a few times. So Laura is the founder and director of the Trauma Stewardship Institute, and she's the author of Trauma Stewardship and the Age of Overwhelm. She's the host of the podcast Future Tripping, and that's dedicated to conversations about overwhelm. She's widely recognized as a pioneer in the field of trauma exposure, and she's worked nationally and internationally for more than 3 decades. Much of her work is being invited to assist in the aftermath of community catastrophes, and unfortunately, we see too many of those these days. Simultaneously, she's long been active in community organizing and movements for social and environmental justice. She's taught on issues surrounding systematic oppression, structural supremacy, liberation theory. Laura is on the advisory board of Z Girls, an organization that supports young girls in sports. She's a founding member of the International Transformational Resilience Network, which supports the development of capacity to address climate change. Laura also served as an associate producer of the award-winning film, A Lot Like You. She was given a Yo Mama Award in recognition of her work as a community activist mother. So it's indeed my honor and pleasure to welcome Laura. Now turn it over to you, Laura.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to get to spend some time with you all. I wish it was in person, but we are going to make the best of this. And I want to start by doing exactly what I would do if we were in person, where I want to take a few minutes and hear from you all any requests you have
The one
this time
I got
together.
for today.
Um, so let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to pull up my chat here so I can follow too. Okay, let me tell you a little bit of what I'm going to be talking about, and then I want to make sure that we take a couple minutes at the beginning doing exactly what I would do if we were in person, where I would go around the room and hear from you all any requests you have of this time. Essentially, what we're going to be looking at is this idea of cumulative toll. Given everything you all have going on, everything you've been through, all of that, what is the cumulative toll on you personally? What's the toll on you professionally? What's the toll on you personally as well as collectively? Teams, units, departments, larger systems and structures. I want to say that, if I had the privilege of being with you all a little over 2 years ago, we would have had plenty to talk about. Probably none of you would have said you were in a state of nirvana then, but we've had the pandemic come in and stay. We've had all this systematic oppression, structural supremacy surfacing. Of course, none of that's new, but it's surfacing in horrifying ways. The climate crisis, accelerating, also not new, accelerating quickly. Regardless of where anybody's at politically, I'm not going to presume to know, but I don't know anybody who's psyched about what's happening with our democracy. So you've got your personal lives, which probably feel like they've got a lot going on and a ton of caretaking in your personal lives. You have your jobs, which are massive, and then you have these additional 4 layers, right? Now, that in and of itself enough to make it hard to get out of bed on any given morning, of course. But the other thing I just want to mention, even though we won't be able to go into it right now, given our time, but I'm going to make sure you all have my contact information so we can stay in touch in the future if you'd like, is a larger conversation of intergenerational transmission of trauma, intergenerational transmission of oppression, and epigenetics. So what's unfolding in June 2022, in and of itself, for sure, enough to make it hard to just proceed. But I also want to acknowledge that for many of you, you are also probably wading through these very tumultuous waters of the intergenerational transmission of all this as well. I know we're going to cover strategies, so that's kind of where I'm going to really put my focus is on strategies, but I do want to just take a couple minutes and hear from you all any requests you have of this time. So 2 questions for you. One, when we're talking about vicarious trauma, cumulative toll, bearing witness over time, what's that impact on you, personally, professionally, individually, collectively? What would you like out of that conversation? And sometimes when we're really overwhelmed, we have no idea what would be helpful. So then just give me a sense of how you're doing. I am so grateful for this platform, and it means we can be together working during a pandemic and spending this time together during a pandemic. But as you know, it's really hard to tell how anybody's doing over the platform. If I was in a room with you, I'd have a quick sense of how you all were. So the other thing that would be helpful is just if you give me a little window into how are your spirits, how's morale, how are you feeling, what's kind of weighing on your heart, what feels super noisy in your head these days. So come on mic if you would like, all right? You can jump on mic if you'd like. If you don't want to do that, I have the chat pulled up. And if you don't want to speak in front of your 477 esteemed colleagues, go ahead and just direct message me. But the 2 questions are anything you'd like out of this conversation on vicarious trauma, on overwhelm, how it impacts us. And if you have no idea what you want, just give me some sense of how you're doing, how your spirits are, how's your heart, how's your mind. And I'm going to then take that information and that will help guide where we go in this conversation. Go ahead, Patty.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm always excited to see you speaking a few times. I'll put my thing on video real quick. Yes, when you talk about vicarious trauma, I've been, up and down in terms of being more management and supervisorial, and now direct service, which is my favorite. But I think in terms of the work we do, oftentimes, no matter how empathetic our management going up, they become removed from the true impact of and the many layers of the direct service folks' vicarious trauma.
Okay, and so part of that is just how do we, part of what can affect morale is if we don't feel seen, if we don't feel heard, if we don't feel understood. And that can be at all layers, right? And I think that's like on a good day, that can be challenging in an organization. And it can also be the more tired you get, the more depleted, the more afraid you get. I think what we call negativity bias, it can be very, very, very hard to assume well about others. So then that even makes that dynamic more challenging. Thank you so much. Emily, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I just wanted to start by saying that I read trauma stewardship in my social work class in college, and so I'm so excited to hear you speak today. It was a really powerful book. We actually took the whole course and just took the book bit by bit, and I just got so much from it. So I'm having a fangirl moment. But I'm interested to learn more about vicarious trauma. I'm a case manager, and so I think having this knowledge will help me to learn more about my client's story. From what I've noticed, from the pandemic, we went from home visits to over the phone, and I felt this shift of wanting just to get things done because I wasn't connecting with anyone, but I had so much work that I needed to do that I have noticed that my ability to listen to people's stories and traumas my threshold has changed. And then just on a personal note, I come from Japanese Americans, and my family were in internment camps. And so there's lots of trauma in my history, and I've noticed some connections with illness. So I would just be curious on a personal note to learn a little bit more about how maybe I can stop some of these patterns and provide healing to my family.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for your kind words, and totally hear you on everything you're sharing. I'm going to, just because I have no short-term memory, I want to make sure to give you all my contact information right now. So Emily, part of what we researched for the age of overwhelm was a lot of that intergenerational piece and the epigenetics piece. So you could get the book from the library, okay? And if you have a hard time finding it there, just be in touch with us and I can send you a copy of it. But so traumastewardship.com, everyone, that's how you can reach out to us, all right? So I just want to make sure to get that contact information to you because I might forget later. So traumastewardship.com, you're welcome to reach out to us for anything personal, anything professional that would be helpful. And then for any additional support at all around overwhelm and trauma, like Kathy said, the podcast is Future Tripping, and then the Instagram where we put some kind of regular reminders about how to sustain on there, as well as some trailers of our guests for the podcast. It's at Future Tripping with Laura. So that's the podcast. Instagram is at Future Tripping with Laura, but at that Instagram, we also put some reminders and kind of things that you can remember to keep on going. And then the podcast is Future Tripping. So those are just two places to be in touch with us to kind of interrupt any further isolation around overwhelm. Okay, this is so helpful. And what's coming in the chat is also really helpful. And I want you to know for folks who are direct messaging me, I'm getting those as well. So let me just take 1 second and look through these. There are lots and lots of themes. So this is great. Yeah, you're in good company, everyone. Lots of themes. Okay, this is really, really helpful. I appreciate you all taking the time just to fill me in because, again, it's very different doing this remotely. And when I'm in a room, I get a much better sense of how people are doing. So this is extremely helpful to get a sense. Okay, this is wonderful. Okay, this is great. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay, let's do this. I think let's just jump into our first slide. I think given what you all are sharing, what's coming in the chat, and also all the direct messages, we've got some really good themes to work with. So let's do that first. So Rebecca, would you mind sharing that first slide, so that circle? So Rebecca's gonna put up this slide. I think you all received this visual in advance. If you didn't, no stress. We'll get it to you afterwards. Just don't stress at all. We will get it to you later. And it's also on our website under the handout section of our website, okay? So let me explain a little bit about the circle before we go through it, because I don't want any of you leaving our time today feeling, more overwhelmed than when we started. And I know that this circle is a little bit of a schlep to go through. So I want to make sure to explain to you why I'm taking time to go through it. Okay. So there's a few primary reasons I want to spend time on this circle. It's not just to further put you into despair. Number one has to do with isolation. You all know this so well. You all have tons of expertise on this given the work you're doing. You know that one of the most damaging things when it comes to anything related to trauma and anything related to oppression is isolation, is if we feel alone, all right? So to the best of my ability, one of the things I want to make sure I'm doing today is communicate with you as much as possible that if you are navigating anything on this circle, you're in very, very, very good company. So should you ever wake up and feel, am I the only one who has this much fatigue in my bone marrow? Am I the only one who feels like I can't parent my own kids one more day? Am I the only one who feels this heartbroken? I just want you to know you're in great company, okay? So not taking away anything you all have going on, but you can tell from the circle, it's not something I whipped up for you at 8 a.m. this morning. So every field I'm working in every country I'm working, this is what folks have going on. So I know it might not feel like a huge hug, but it's meant to feel like a big embrace for me and just remind you, absolutely, you are not alone. You're in really good company. The second reason I want to spend a few minutes on this is it's really important to me, as I said at the beginning, to go through as many strategies as possible. Strategy number one, self-reflection, introspection in terms of how you're doing. So that's what this is us gauging a little bit about how we're doing. Many of you I know are primary trauma survivors. You've gone through primary trauma in your life. If that's the case, you know that trauma can be a lot of things, but it's usually not confusing when it's happening in terms of we know something's happening. Part of what's really challenging with our conversation this morning is we are talking about a cumulative toll. We are talking about over time, how you are exposed to suffering, hardship, crisis, trauma of humans, other living beings in the planet, what the cumulative toll is. And because it's a cumulative toll, unlike primary trauma, it can be very hard to gauge how you're being impacted. None of you are going to become cynical overnight. None of you are going to become numb in an afternoon, right? It's not how it happens. It's a day in and day out erosion, which means it can be really hard to gauge how you are being impacted. I want to lessen your cognitive overload. So I think it can be helpful just to have a visual for you to check in on. Any of you based at home, I don't think it needs to go in your refrigerator. Slip it under your laptop, put it in a drawer, have a little calendar alert reminding you to check in on Laura's Circle every few days. Those of you like in a workplace setting, I would wallpaper your workplaces with this, all right? What a lot of places are doing is they're spending the first couple minutes of every staff meeting, unit meeting, department meeting, having like a 2-minute structured check-in on vicarious trauma, on cumulative toll and overwhelm, right? Part of what's helpful about that is we want to destigmatize this conversation. You all know that in so many fields, including the ones you're a part of, there's historically been a sense if you're cool enough and tough enough and committed to your cause enough, you're just going to suck it up, right? Shut up, keep your head down, proceed. And that's one of the things that we want to shift the paradigm around, that this has nothing to do with your level of dedication, devotion, training, that when humans are exposed to suffering, inevitably there are going to be significant consequences. So we want to destigmatize that. I think to that end, it can be helpful to put it around workplaces, and I think having it at the beginning of staff meeting, for sure you want it structured, right? But you have, the staff meeting, like first couple of minutes, like, hey team, let's do our, vicarious trauma check-in, right? How tired are we this week? How's our negativity bias? How's our cynicism? Doing a little check-in. And in that way, you move away from like, Monica, I don't know what's going on with you this week. Also, Dan, you seem to be really tripping, right? So instead, we're doing a cause and effect. We're all impacted by this. Another piece that I want to say about this is I have no idea how you're doing other than what you're sharing with me. But if you're in good company with everyone else I'm working with, what I'm hearing from other folks is a huge decrease in empathy, decrease in patience, decrease in humility, decrease in grace, an increase in irritability, an increase in aggravation, an increase in hostility. And so I think the other thing that can be helpful with this is it just gives us a little bit of context. So if you're sitting in staff meeting and a colleague's going to say something and you feel a wave of hostility rush over you, it can be helpful to just take a moment and be like, you know what? My colleagues got some of that stuff going on the circle, so do I. And in our society right now, there's so much personalization. So I think it can be really helpful to just open this up a little bit about like, they've got stuff going on, I've got stuff going on. And again, we kind of pull in some space and graciousness. Similar with your in-laws, if they're over on Sunday evening and you're very challenged with your in-laws, you can just remind yourself of this, all right? We're not taking away responsibility, accountability, any of that, but just trying to like have a little humility and a little grace here. Okay, so those are the few reasons that I want to spend a couple minutes on this, right? We want to decrease our isolation. We want to interrupt the stigma. We want to make sure to lessen your cognitive overload, so to give you something that you can check in on, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to roll through this. I'm going to be going at a pretty quick clip, and then we're going to pause and have time for Q&A, all right? But I'm not going to be following the chat as I do it. So if there's any questions you have, if something's not making sense, just come on mic and just interrupt me, because I won't be looking at the chat. So just straight up interrupt me. Okay. A reminder, all of these are things you can be feeling personally and professionally, and you can be feeling these individually and collectively. Up top, feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, and feeling like you can never do enough. In Spanish, we say no vale la pena. This is that experience of like, what does it matter what I'm doing? It's never enough. Those of you who have done the work a long time, this is where you have that feeling of like, does any of this make a difference? Those of you who are new to it, you have that kind of look in your eye of like, I could have gone into coding or engineering. What am I doing, right? So it's that kind of sick feeling you have in your stomach of like, does any of this matter? This is just where things can feel so insurmountable. one of the things that we pay attention to if we spend more time in a retreat setting is we would talk about internalized oppression. We would talk about messages you got back in the day when you were growing up and all the ways that oppression in the United States, at least I'm going to only speak for the United States, sets in by the dominant group having the undominant group come to believe about themselves that they're not enough. This happens when you're growing up as a child. You come to believe this misinformation that's coming from everywhere. And a key piece of that oppression is scarcity. You come to believe about yourself that you are not enough. And what happens then, if we don't resolve that in our adolescence, which most of us do not, we come into our adulthood with a known or unknown sense of feeling not enough. Our society waits for you with consumerism. And what happens in our workplaces, with respect, many of our workplaces, the strong suit is not sustainability. So what happens in many of our workplaces is there can be a frenetic culture, a scarcity-based culture, even if it's well-intentioned, of we're not doing enough, we should be doing more. And when that collides with your own internalized oppression is where you can feel like you're losing your mind. All right. If you didn't have any internalized oppression, you'd walk into all of our workplaces and you just kind of pause, look around, and have that moment of, I'm sorry, is this our plan? Like, is this what we're doing? But what happens is it taps into a nerve, and then you do this thing where you're like, oh, I know how to do more. This is what I've done my entire life. So you go from sending 20 emails a day to 200 emails a day. You go from serving 30 committees to 300 committees. You go from writing like you just do more and more and more and more, but it's never enough. Okay, what I want to see in workplace culture is a workplace that interrupts this, a workplace that focuses on sustainability, and a workplace that in no way endorses martyrdom. So you would never want to be a part of a workplace that's like, okay, everybody, we're having an Employee of the Year recognition event. Matthew, you're the Employee of the Year. You never said no last year in a full calendar year. You pushed through 2 rounds of COVID to come in. Also, we heard you had shingles and mono. You came in during that. You're the Employee of the Year. Here's a plaque. All right. So what you want is a culture where you work that interrupts martyrdom, that doesn't endorse martyrdom, and that really, really focuses on sustainability. Even if that doesn't come from leadership, I don't want you all to lose heart. I want to remind you, you can create your own microclimates, right? And so even if that's not coming from larger leadership, you all understand how powerful it is to create your own microculture where you support each other in sustainability. Right? So if Ingrid sees Carla taking lunch, Ingrid's going to say to Carla, your lunch looks awesome. Give me the recipe. Ingrid would never say to Carla, I'm sorry, Carla, I didn't realize we sit and eat lunch these days because I actually care about our clients. And so apparently you don't because you're taking time to eat lunch, right? If Linda sees Pam going on a 3-day weekend, Linda's going to say to Pam, have a great 3-day weekend. Don't look back. Linda's not going to like air quote to Pam like, oh, wish we could all take a 3-day weekend, right? So what's really important is that you're all working for this culture of sustainability and we're interrupting martyrdom. All right. Several on the right-hand side now are about physiological responses, hypervigilance, feeling serious all the time. If you slide down there, you see fight, flight, freeze response. You see dissociation, all right? These are physiological responses, and part of what's hard here is you have a hard time gearing up, chilling, gearing up, chilling. So if any of you grew up driving stick shift, or if any of you drive cars that are, stick shifts, right? You know that grinding of the gears that happens? That's what this is like. It's not a problem to be hyper vigilant, but it's hard when you can't go in and out of it smoothly. It's not a problem to be in a fight, flight, freeze response, but we want you to be able to flow in and out of it and not get stuck in being dissociated. Okay. So hypervigilance, feeling serious all the time, this is where you're kind of in a jacked up, hyper-aroused state, takes a huge hit on your adrenal system and your immune system. Anger and cynicism, not an issue to have anger. We all hopefully are, move through some anger and rage at some time. We want to stay connected to our full range of feelings. It's part of being human, but we want to be able to be productive with it and constructive. And part of what's hard with anger in particular is most of us did not get an awesome upbringing in terms of how to do anger well. Here we are in the Pacific Northwest, so a lot of what you see is passive aggressiveness, and you also will see a sense of cynicism. I don't know any of you personally, you all seem lovely, so you might not be navigating like raw cynicism like a cloud above your head, But what I imagine a lot of you can relate to instead of that is cynical humor, that a lot of you employ cynical humor. I'm not worried about that as long as you're able to say, I'm full of rage, my whole team is full of rage, we laugh all the time. But what I would worry about is if I was working with you and you were saying something to the effect of like, we're not angry, we're just hilarious people who do this work. All right. So if you're tracking cynical humor, you want to know there's something underneath it that you want to honor. Guilt, so many ways we can feel guilty. Fear, so many ways that can manifest. And there's so much complicated grieving. I mean, you all are the experts on this, of course, but layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of loss. Of course, there's loss of life, but there's also all these other losses that we're navigating. And if you just think about your last couple of years too, you spent 3 years planning your mom's 85th birthday party that got canceled. Your own child didn't get to graduate from high school in the way you thought. Like, there's just so much disappointment and loss. And that's all hard. And again, it's particularly hard. Again, you all know this so well that we are in a society that by and large is very grief illiterate and has total lack of support for folks grieving and mourning. The next one is lack of awe. This is a really important one just in terms of our quality of life. Lack of awe is, you wake up in the morning, you see Mount Rainier and a sunrise, you spend time last weekend with your 3-year-old nephew, you go on a hike and there's like a whole swarm of beautiful butterflies and you don't feel anything. Okay, so intellectually, I'm sure you're all very grateful people. So you're like, Mount Rainier, pretty, love my niece and nephew, they're awesome, butterflies, nice. But you're not feeling, like there's no awe anymore, all right? Sense of persecution can be individual. Usually this is collective, like you'll notice your whole team feels persecuted, your whole department feels persecuted. Fight, flight, freeze, again, you might be coming in and out of that dissociation. Many of us can relate to this. The next one is about creativity. Neuroscientists are going to tell you to be creative. You have to have time and space. Most of us feel like we don't have that. But think of all the ways you all have had to be creative recently. You had to do your job differently. You were homeschooling your kids. Your relatives moved in with you, and apparently they're never moving out. Like, there's all these ways we have to be creative still right now, but you can feel like your brain is broken. This next section I want to spend a few extra minutes on. This is where I want to draw your attention to the toll on you. So I know that many of you, again, even without knowing you personally, I know that many of you, your strong suit is paying attention to others, tracking others, being like super in tune with others. And part of the way that many of you might be good at what you do is you've learned over time to just keep turning down the volume, turning down the volume, turning down the volume on your own needs. So I am just somebody who's going to come into your life right now and encourage you to shift that paradigm. And I want you to like actually turn up the volume on your needs and how you're doing. So I want to talk about this in terms of the impact of all of this on your health. I know we all do this work for so many different reasons, but I trust we have a shared ethic of doing no harm, that we can all agree that we have an ethic as we do this work of do no harm. When I talk about that, probably most of you think about, no, I'm still showing up for the clients I'm serving. I'm still showing up for all these folks I'm taking care of. Obviously, I care about that, but I want you to know that the first place we're going to see harm is not in how you're doing your work. The first place we're going to see harm is in your own health and well-being. If you think about what Chief Self talks about with the web of life, or what King talks about with the single garment of destiny, there are all these parts of the web out there that are very, very compromised, all right? You all are showing up day after day after day, tending to all these parts of the web. Part of what's been hard historically in our work is how do you tend to those parts of the web with the folks you're serving, but simultaneously, as Stevie Wonder says, handle your business. How do you handle your business in your immediate part of the web? How do you make sure that circulation is happening in your web, you are edifying your part of the web, that you understand there's one web of life. That is the reality in life, is interbeing. You cannot bring an A game out there and ignore what is happening here. It's not ethical practice. It's not integrity-based practice. You won't be able to sustain it. So I want to share with you that the first place we see harm when we have the shared ethic of do no harm, it's not out there. The first place you're going to navigate harm is in your own health. Let's talk about physical health. I'm not even talking about, God forbid, diagnoses. Let's talk about, like, you used to never get headaches. Then you started getting a headache every 8 months. Now you have a headache every 8 minutes. But again, you might be somebody who's like, whatever, I'm not in an MRI, it's fine. If I ask you all to take a second right now and feel your jaw, many of you would notice you have a very sore jaw. Some of you might have cracked a tooth. over the pandemic, or more than one. But again, you might be the person you're like, whatever, I've got other teeth, it's fine. So if part of how you roll is you just ignore your own health, I'm going to really ask you to shift that. And I want you to really start turning up the volume on your health. And far, far, far before you get to anything really significant over here. We want to be proactive and preemptive. Second piece of health I want to pay attention to is your own depression, your own anxiety, your own PTSD, your own panic disorder, your own OCD, all of that, right? Everybody I'm working with, every field I'm working in right now, what I'm hearing from my colleagues is like, Laura, obviously I'm depressed. Everybody I work with is depressed. Of course I'm anxious. Do you know one person who's not anxious right now? Love humor, appreciate that we're not isolated, but I just want to remind all of us colleagues, like, that's not the baseline we're going for. The baseline we're going for is not like, we're all depressed and anxious now. Next, right? So we want to pay attention to this. We want to be proactive. We want to get help with it, and we don't want to push it off. All right. The other thing I want to just say about you with each other, this is not going to surprise you, that I am somebody who's going to really encourage you to err on the side of overstepping with your colleagues. If you're worried about a colleague, I would much rather you overstep with them, have them tell you to like chill out and get up out of your grill, than doing this thing that we often do, particularly on the West Coast, of like, I didn't want to say anything to them. I'm sure somebody's going to say something to them. It's definitely not going to be me, but I trust somebody's going to check in with them, right? A lot of times we talk about underperforming with our colleagues and worrying about colleagues there, but I can tell you, I worry just as much about people who hyperperform, who overperform. Okay, that's the first realm of harm. The second realm of harm that I want you to pay attention to is in your personal relationships. This is well before the pandemic, that you probably heard from your loved ones that they feel how you are with them is different than how you are at work. It's something to the effect that your loved ones will say, I don't know how they say you're so good at what you do at work because you suck at home, right? So you can hear that from your roommate, your life partner, your kids. Okay, that's the second place we see harm. The third place is with our colleagues. You all can be doing wonderful work with your clients, but you gossip about each other, you talk trash about each other, you roll your eyes during staff meeting. So it's how we treat each other is not awesome sometimes. By the time any of you are not bringing your A game to the folks you're serving, then I think about it like a mountaineering accident where there are all these indicators we needed to pay attention to. And I'm coming in kind of hard here on this with you all because I'm all about prevention and being proactive. And what I don't want is you being able to focus on this once you're really far down this path, right? Next one is where you feel exhausted and you feel very saturated in your nervous system. This is a deep, soulful, spiritual bone marrow exhaustion. Next one is confirmation bias. This is where you get caught up in good, bad, right, wrong, and you get a dopamine hit when people agree with you. And then you like only start wanting to like hang out with those people, do committee work with those people, be on the same team as those people, right? Next one is where you have a hard time being present. You feel very avoidant, and there's very intense sense of cognitive overload in your brain. Okay, this next one is where, because there's so much that's out of control right now, unless you're a spiritually enlightened being, what's out of control right now and the extent to things being out of control can really be bringing you down. So it's like you're using all of your capacity to tolerate everything that's out of control where you must. And so now what's happening is you might find you're getting hyper controlling. Very, very controlling other places. So if you have children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews, they might say they feel over-parented by you. If you live with people, they might notice that you're pretty intense to live with right now. In my house, there's like a lot of OCD that happens in our kitchen with the cleanliness that has to happen. I can't handle things going on out there, but I will have a clean kitchen, right? You might see this in the workplace where you're like, my boss used to be super chill, but now they micromanage me all the time. Or you're just at Trader Joe's, you're at Costco, you're at the farmer's market, and you just look around, you're like, why is everybody so intense right now? All right. Next one is where you feel disheartened and dispirited. This is a very palpable feeling of disheartened and dispirited. Grandiosity is the next one. We want you to appreciate yourself, obviously, but we never want you going to this place of like, if I wasn't here, none of this would get done. And then you stay doing what you're doing longer than it's helpful. Negativity bias, this is a parallel process with our country. Our country, as you know right now, is having a very hard time assuming well about others. So this is your own negativity bias. You have a hard time assuming well. You're sitting in staff meeting A colleague goes to say something, you don't even listen to what your colleague's about to say, you just have a thought come into your head. What is this jackass about to say now? You get a text from your sister-in-law, you don't even look at the text, you're just like, ugh. So where otherwise, you might like be kind of glasses half full person, even if you never used to be a glasses half empty person. Now you're like a real glasses half empty person. The next one, I'm sure is none of you all. Oh, no, that's the second to the next one. This next category is where you have a hard time empathizing or you feel very numb. Again, because you all are so devoted and dedicated, you can override it. You have that conversation with yourself of like, somebody right now might feel a certain way. Perhaps I should nod, make eye contact, lean forward. But internally, you feel very numb. And then there's also minimizing. This is where you start putting pain on a hierarchy and suffering becomes a whole competition. This next category, I'm sure, is none of you. This is sub-impeccable behavior and toxic conduct. Next category is addictions. You all know this well, I'm sure, but let's just remind ourselves there's a huge continuum. Gin and tonics, margaritas, drinking every night. There's also getting high. There's also pharmaceuticals you're on in an unmindful way. But remember, you can also be addicted to behavior. You can be addicted to being right. You can be addicted to being needed. You can be addicted to being overscheduled. You can be addicted to criticizing everybody and everything all the time. You can be addicted to the glass being half empty. And then there's the classics: adrenaline, caffeine, sugar, nicotine, highly processed food. And then the last category is where you feel lonely and you feel isolated, and there are so many strained relationships right now with people. And that's very, very challenging, particularly when so many folks feel lonely and isolated. So the strained relationships is that experience where you're like, wait, what? Like, you thought you and your best friends from college were on the same page, and then 2 years ago you found out they don't believe in public health. You thought you and your neighbor, everything was super chill with your neighbor, and then you heard them talking about what's going on in Florida and Texas, and you're like, we are definitely not on the same page, right? So it's that experience in your relationships where you're like, wait, what? Right? And then at the same time that you feel really lonely and isolated. Okay, can we bring this down just so I can see everybody again? Give me a sense, y'all. Can you relate to this? Do you see yourself in any of this? Are you picking up what I'm putting down here? You feeling me on any of this? Would any of your loved ones be high-fiving me? Are any of you feeling inspired to Photoshop your face and put your face in the middle of this? Gift it to some of your loved ones. Any of your pets be nudging me towards certain categories with their little wet noses? Okay. All right. Feeling me on this. All right. Good, good, good. Okay. So again, a few reminders. You can put this up places, not on your refrigerator. I think you find more beautiful things to put on your refrigerator at home, but workplaces I put it up around, and I think starting staff meeting, doing a check-in on this can be really, really, really helpful. All right? Okay. So now when we talk about what to do, let me just share with you my assumption with you all. This is just my assumption. You tell me if I'm wrong, is that you're short on time, energy, inspiration, capacity, and cash. That's what I'm just assuming. Most of you don't have like a ton of time and a ton of cash laying around. So if I'm wrong and if you have like huge amounts of time and like lots of cash, email me after this workshop, okay? And I'm going to send you some additional strategies to go through. But the strategies we're going to focus on now are the desperate times, desperate measures strategies. The strategies we're going to dive into are for those of you who absolutely are not trying to leave this thing with a to-do list and you're feeling very low on time, capacity, inspiration, and financial resources. Okay. So when I think about that in terms of desperate times, desperate measures, and how to be really strategic about all this, the first place I go to is our nervous system in terms of how do we care for our nervous system. When I'm talking about our nervous system, I'm certainly talking about, you have your nervous system, of course, but I also would submit to you, it can be helpful to think about like where you live has a nervous system, okay? Where you work has a nervous system. Where your loved ones spend time. There's schools, your folks might live somewhere with other folks who are their age, right? Your community has a nervous system. Our region has a nervous system. Our country has a nervous system. So I think it can be helpful to think about like there's your nervous system, but there's all these other nervous systems that are interwoven together, All right. So part of this with all these nervous systems that are interwoven together, right, is to think about how do you keep the circulation going there and how do you keep those nervous systems from getting completely and totally and entirely like flooded. All right. So when we talk about strategies and when we talk about these two tactics of what to do, strategy number one, like the easiest strategy in terms of sustaining yourself, right, is you want to take a second every day, takes you a second, look around your day, and you're going to say to yourself every day, today, what are all the ways I can refrain from exposing my nervous system to unnecessary exposure? How can I limit and refrain from any unnecessary exposure that would otherwise jack up my nervous system? That is like mantra number one, is refrain from unnecessary exposure that would otherwise affect your nervous system. That's the easiest lift strategy. Strategy number two, where you can't refrain from that, is we're going to talk about having conditions in place to metabolize. But again, you can only do so much metabolizing of this, all right? So the easiest thing to tend to is you want to refrain from any unnecessary exposure in your life. And then where you can't do that, we talk about metabolizing. Some examples of unnecessary exposure: social media. If you're on social media, get off of social media. If you don't want to get off of social media because maybe you're in like a leukemia support group that happens to be helpful, or a parents of neurodivergent kids that happens to be helpful, cool, but then limit the rest of your time on social media. But let's be honest, most of us are not on social media in that way. All right. If you're going to be on social media, limit the duration, the time, the way you engage in your platforms. Then there's following the news. All right. If you've never ever spent time with me before, you probably picked up within 5 milliseconds, right, at the beginning, that obviously I'm not somebody who's going to tell you to like not work for social and environmental justice and social change. But I want to just remind you, if the reason you're tracking the news and if the reason you're on social media is because you care about social justice and you care about environmental justice and you care about social change, and you think for that reason you need to be tracking everything happening on the news and in social media, I want to remind you there is no direct causation between how you're showing up for society and how much news you're exposing yourself to. Your nervous system will not be able to tolerate everything coming in, and it results in lots of what's on that circle: numbing, dissociation, minimizing, all of that. Okay, so there are ways to know what's going on out there, news, social media wise, without just completely exposing yourself to it. 2 other things: being really mindful of relationships, that you're in reciprocal relationships. That's another place of unnecessary exposure. And then there's also what we consume, including conversations that we participate in. That sometimes you've heard the term emotional contagion. All right. Now, where you can't avoid exposure, we talk about metabolizing. Let me say a little bit about this. The reason I'm focusing on the nervous system is because it's like one of the most efficient things that we can talk about in terms of how to sustain. But again, I'm not just talking about your nervous system. I'm also talking about your workplace culture nervous system. Okay. And I'm talking about the field you're in. I'm talking about your larger community as well. So I want to remind you that, part of the reason we care about this is every single day you're going through your day, and there's going to be any number of things, think about them as waves, that are going to arise in your day. There's going to be caretaking needs. There's going to be work situations. There's going to be what's going on in the world. Many of these waves that come into your day all day long, your brain is going to say, you're fine, chilling, you got it. You've done this before. You're cool. You're solid. But for you all, given your huge jobs, and I imagine your big personal lives, you're going to have any number of things that arise where your brain is going to register, this is a perceived threat. This is overwhelming. I need to do something about this. And when that happens, a ton of energy is going to get generated in your nervous system to try to help you respond to this. But part of what gets hard with our nervous system is because we have the mid-prefrontal cortex. This governs your executive functioning, and part of what that governs is impulse control. If you're over the age of 25 and your adolescent brain has come together nicely for you, When this surfaces in your nervous system, this huge rush to help you deal with what you perceive as threatening or overwhelming, when it comes into your nervous system, like other animals, it doesn't get to just go out of your nervous system when they flee, fight, all of that. You're going to have the mid-prefrontal cortex, a voice in your brain that's saying something to the effect of, yo, you got to hold it together. That's your impulse control, executive functioning. We love it. But what I want to remind you of is when that happens in your brain, when it tells you to hold it together, it's a braking mechanism, which means that this, what was arising in your nervous system now, it has nowhere to go. It is stopping here because of your executive functioning. So what we have to do to be able to sustain ourselves is communicate with our executive functioning. Love you, impulse control. You're awesome. Nevertheless, I need to intentionally override you. If you don't have a mechanism, what I look at with trauma, overwhelm, vicarious trauma, is what conditions do you have in place to metabolize and override this? If you don't have those conditions in place, you can imagine how few things you have to be exposed to in your day before you get very, very mired in this. It starts loitering, lingering, circulating in your nervous system. And before very long, you're going to get saturated. You're going to have a feeling throughout your whole nervous of saturation. You're going to have a feeling throughout your whole agency of saturation. You're going to have a feeling throughout your workforce of saturation. You're going to have that feeling in your home of saturation, in your community of saturation. And here's the thing. As humans, you're not going to stay saturated. As much as that sucks, like with that's where that circle comes from, is saturation. Much of a drag that is, you won't stay saturated. What's going to happen is you're going to rupture. There'll be a hemorrhaging that happens. Some of you are people where you internalize everything, you swallow everything, you're going to suck it all up, it's going to eat away at you. Some of you, what's going to happen is you rupture this way. You yell at your kids, you don't let somebody in front of you on the freeway, you're super rude to the person who hands you your coffee, all right, and way worse. And most of us oscillate between an internal rupture and an external rupture. Okay, so let me just pause here for a second, and I want to just get a sense from you all. Can you relate to this experience of becoming saturated and rupturing and oscillating between saturation, rupturing? Is that something you can relate to in your own health? Can you relate to it in your household? Can you relate to it in your community? Do you see it with the clients you're serving, this experience of becoming saturated, rupturing? Okay, so that's something you can relate to? All right. So the other thing I want to just say before I move on, when I was saying you're going to have this experience over here where a wave's going to rise and your brain is going to register it as perceived threat, I just want to remind you it's personal and subjective. So what's threatening to me, what feels overwhelming to me, you could be totally relaxed and chilling. All right, so this is where, again, it's another appeal for being as gracious with each other and having as much humility with each other as possible. This has a lot to do with what's going on present day. It has to do with what's happened in your life. It has to do with if you're from a historically oppressed, marginalized, underserved community. It has to do with if you're a trauma survivor. And then I think it has to do with intergenerational transmission of this. But it's important to remember that just because Monica is feeling overwhelmed doesn't mean Dan is going to feel overwhelmed. But we want Dan to have beginner's mind, as we say in Buddhism. We want Dan to be really curious about this and not impose Dan's experience on Monica. Right? Same thing. If Brittany is feeling super overwhelmed, but Mary's not feeling overwhelmed, we want that approach with curiosity, not an imposing. All right. This is where you want to, my daughters and I talk about kind of having a mantra of like, what I don't know about this is everything. So this, what is perceived threat and perceived overwhelm, we have to understand it's personal and it's subjective. This is why we want to have a lot of compassion, empathy, grace with each other. Okay, so now when we look at what are some real concrete strategies, Rebecca, would you mind putting up that map for managing one's day? So Rebecca's going to share this map for managing one's day. This is our most recent tool from our institute. Okay, there's a lot on here, not because there's so much to do. There's a lot on here because this tool was designed to be given primarily to people with whom I don't get to work. Okay, so there's so much on here words wise, not because it's like a big to-do list, but just this is meant to be a standalone tool. Please don't perceive this as a to-do list. If you do, you're going to be super, super frustrated that Kathy invited me in. You're going to be in a bad mood. It's going to spiral. This is not a to-do list. Try to receive this as like an abundance of offerings with some sense of humor of like, cool, who knew I had so many options in terms of how to do this, all right? These are some of the most efficient, most effective, least expensive strategies you can pull in. All right, so try to receive this in the space of abundance. It's not a to-do list. The other thing I want to say about this is it is imperative to me that I come at my work from a systemic and a structural place. So I never do my work like how some people, with respect, traditionally think of like self-care. That's not language I use, and it's not how I do my work. I really come at this from a structural direction and a systemic direction. So I believe that where we work, our workplaces and our fields have a moral mandate, an ethical obligation to create sustainable environments where we do this work. I think it is absolutely critical that your workplace environment is one that creates a sustainable atmosphere where you do your work, that it is not a setup from the beginning that you can't possibly do what you're being asked to do in the time frame you have with the resource you've been given. Okay. Now I understand that might not be the case for everyone, but I want you to know what you deserve in terms of that. And I want you to know how I come at this work in terms of sustainability is first and foremost from a structural systemic place. So I want to make sure this never comes across as like, okay, individuals, I need you now to turn all your frowns upside down and just keep going. All right. So I really want you to understand like how important it is that we look at this structurally and systemically. Also, what's of most importance to me is that no harm comes to you as you do your work. So I want to make sure that you have resources at your fingertips, even if your supervisor never gets with any of this, right? Even if your workplace never tracks any of this. Okay. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to roll through this map and then we're going to take a couple minutes for Q&A, and then I'm going to remind you how you all can be in touch with me. Okay. So here's the thing. I'm going to walk us through this. So don't worry about this. You don't take this time right now to like read everything on here. I'm going to walk you through this, and then I think you've all been sent this, and if you haven't, we will try to get it. Let me just okay, I'm going to put my information in here one more time for you, just in case anybody joined us later. So you can find these handouts, and there's several more at traumastewardship.com. That's one word, but traumastewardship.com. So you can pull them off of there, and you're welcome to share this with others. And then again, another resource for you, the podcast is Future Tripping, and where you can find some regular reminders about sustaining yourselves is at Future Tripping with Laura is the Instagram. Okay, so just so you know where you can find all of that. All right, so I'm going to go through the map. You don't feel like you have to read this right now. So here's how this works. The bottom purple foundational piece there, you see that bottom purple color there? That is where we talk about moral mandate, ethical obligation to create sustainable environments for doing this. All right, so that's what that is, just a reminder of you knowing what you deserve. You go up to where it says my day begins, that blue thought bubble. This is what we've already covered at the beginning. Climate crisis, structural supremacy, pandemic. It's not to overwhelm you. On the contrary, it is just to remind you there's a lot going on. We want you to be compassionate with yourself. If at any given point you're like, why does everybody seem to be doing better than I am? Why is everybody saying this is the new normal? I can't deal. I still feel so out of body. It's just a reminder there's a lot going on. Try to be kind with yourself. Jack Kornfield says if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. Go up to the nervous system. This is what we were just talking about. 2 primary strategies with your nervous system. Avoid unnecessary exposure. Where you can't avoid unnecessary exposure, we're going to look at metabolizing. Let's talk about some real specific practices now. Go up to the sunrise. This is a practice called protecting your morning. When you first wake up in the morning, don't reach for a portable electronic device. Don't check the news or social media or what your family needs from you or what your workplace needs from you. As a workplace, don't send emails before a certain time of day. Don't have meetings before a certain time of day. Certainly those of you in leadership, you don't want to send emails at 2 in the morning and do the thing of like, no, I don't expect you to respond to my emails at 2 in the morning. It's just when I'm super creative. That's why I email my whole team at 2 in the morning. All right. So you want to be really thoughtful as a system and an org here. All right. And then you, when you first wake up, don't reach for anything that's going to bring in anything from the outside. What we're trying to avoid here is you wake up, you're not even awake, you reach for a portable electronic device, and cortisol floods in. And then you spend the rest of your day trying to crawl out from underneath all these stress hormones. That is a practice called protecting your morning. Costs you nothing. Across the river, Pema Chodron says, death is certain, your time of death is uncertain. How do you want to spend your time? Every day, I would encourage you to have a contemplative practice. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic thing, but while you're walking your dog, while you're making sandwiches, ask yourself once a day at least, why am I doing what I'm doing? It reminds you your life is not being done to you, and it's one of the most important things when we look at vicarious trauma. Then you're going to come down. We're talking about all these different practices in terms of how to metabolize. Nevertheless, 6 days a week, I urge you, beg you, get your heart rate up and break a sweat unless you're medically advised against it, or get as close as you can. Part of what we want to do here is a full nervous system reset, a full purging, a full detoxing. Good news, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes. You don't have to train for a triathlon. Also, I don't care what it looks like. Chop wood, play the saxophone, box, do stairs. There's so many things you can do. But you want your heart rate up. You want to break a sweat, unless you're medically advised against it, or get as close as you can. And I'd like you to have some intention of may anything that's accumulated in my nervous system over the last 24 hours be released. So I have a chance of showing up for the next 24 hours and bringing my A game. The next section is on addictions, being mindful of what we're addicted to, what we consume, being really thoughtful about that, and why we numb out. The next section is about being outside. This isn't about hiking or summiting or kayaking. This is about when you have what's called time confetti, 2 minutes before your kid gets off a bus, 3 minutes before a meeting starts. Most of us pick up a phone, doom scroll, distract ourselves. Try to go outside. Try to take those time confetti moments, go outside, and if you can't go outside, look outside, okay? And in that way, as a colleague said, just watch the way that light filters through a tree, right? Even if you don't like the environment, even if like this isn't your thing to be outside, I can't say enough about all the research points to what it does for your nervous system and your ability to re-regulate in your brain, right? Take meetings outside, have work calls outside. The next section we're not meant to go into here. This is kind of a whole separate training we do on cognitive overload and decision fatigue. But at the end, I'll put a book in the chat. Can't imagine any of you have time to read. If you don't have time to read, just go ahead and download some interviews on this. But decision fatigue and cognitive overload is something I would encourage you to ask your workplace to train you on. I care about how it affects you at work, and it's really going to affect you at home. This is where your loved ones are like, what do you want to do today? And you're like, why do I have to decide everything? All right. So decision fatigue is very impactful. When you go off the path to the wave, that's the intergenerational piece that we've talked about. Go back onto the path with the light, the gold light happening. That's about noticing anything going well and paying attention to it. In Spanish, we say aprovechar, give thanks. Right? I don't care if you use the language of gratitude or not, but you want to be firing in your brain so it wires together anything going well. Set alarms to go off on your phone, start every staff meeting with what's going well. Every time you have a client contact, you can say, hey, tell me one thing you're psyched about, right? The next section is about taking time now, even while you're bearing witness to all these things, to immerse yourself in beauty. All of our ancestors talked about you have equanimity, so you can have space to bear witness to the suffering and everything that is brutal. And you also put fresh flowers in your kitchen, turn music on, spend time with people you love. The next section is on mindfulness, including micro practices. It is okay to meditate for 2 minutes a day. It'll change your brain. It's okay to do yoga for 3 minutes a day. It'll help your nervous system. Even if you can't do the practices like you used to or you're aspiring to, micro practices are awesome. Next section is animals. Doesn't work for everybody. If it works for you, it can be incredibly helpful and effective for your nervous system. Next is what we already talked about in terms of the web of life, do no harm. The last section I understand can be very frustrating hearing from me, but I'm going to take the risk. You heard me talk about protect your morning. I need you to guard your time off. When you're off, be off. If you're taking a lunch break, don't be guilty about taking a lunch break. If you take a weekend, enjoy your weekend. Workplaces, don't contact your employees when they're off, right? If your workplace doesn't honor that, get a burner phone. What you need to do, and some of this comes from the research around decision fatigue, you have to allow yourself effective breaks to let your nervous system reset and the cortisol dissipate. And the last piece here is on sleep. Y'all, there's every reason not to sleep well, but I cannot say enough about prioritizing sleep. You don't want to get into sleep deficit. The final sentence on there is a mantra. You may never need it. I find it very helpful. Jeff Lee is an educator in New York City, and one of his mantras is forgive yourself every night, recommit every morning. So this map holds some of the most efficient, most effective, least expensive practices. I would like as many of these to be absorbed by your workplace as possible. As many of them to be absorbed by your workplace as possible. And then I also want you to have them at your fingertips so you can employ them for yourself. Okay, why don't we bring this down just so I can see everybody. We have about a minute to do Q&A. I'm gonna pull up the chat again. Are there any questions I can answer? Is there anything that is feeling confusing to you or anything I can answer before we close? I'm hoping you feel like you have a few strategies you're willing to revive, try, dust off, and maybe some entertaining things to talk about with your loved ones and your colleagues in terms of the circle and these strategies. Yes. Okay, the book on decision fatigue is called Willpower. Let me just type that in the chat. But again, I know many of you will not have time to read, so you can download some interviews. It's also in the book. The Age of Overwhelm is the second book that you'll see on our website. And in the book, The Age of Overwhelm, spelled wrong there by me, there's a whole section on decision fatigue as well. And you can get that book from the library. No need to buy it, okay?
I just wanted to say that I think it's so neat that this is finally like becoming widespread and that like we can finally bring this into our workplace, and trauma-informed care is becoming up on the forefront, and like slowly as it oozes from, you know, human services, like social services, it'll ooze into the rest of society. And like I just think every day that even though it doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere with a lot of these oppressions and social problems, it's really making teeny tiny strides. Like people are like, oh, we're celebrating Juneteenth as a federal holiday? Man, that means this must be really important. Maybe I should rethink how I'm, you know, perceiving this. Just little steps. And trauma's that way. Little bit by little bit, it'll seep into your nervous system. And little bit by little bit, you can heal it. Because neuroplasticity will bring us back to a place of a healthy baseline. So I just wanted to say I'm super happy to be here. It was really cool, and I'm totally printing off the things that you gave us. So
thank you. Thanks,
yeah.
Danielle. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, y'all, I want to be mindful of your time. So thank you so much. You have my contact information, Trauma Stewardship Institute. If you want some support around overwhelm, check out that podcast, Future Tripping. We have conversations every week. This current week, we're talking with the first ever director of mental health for the NBA. Next week, we're having a school teacher from Odessa, Texas. Some of you watch Friday Night Lights. That's based on that community. We have all sorts of people joining us to talk about overwhelm and strategies around overwhelm. So any way we can be of support to you. And every other week of the podcast is dedicated to young adults and adolescents as well. So if you have any of those in your life who you love and care about. Thank you for having me. Take the best of care. Please be in touch if I can be of any support in the future. And just follow up with us at our Institute if there's any questions at all. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
You too. So appreciated. We wanted to take a few more minutes for folks who could stay with us to just pull this together a little bit. Wow, I feel a whole different sense of energy after participating in this experience with Laura. She is amazing. And I'm so glad that we had this opportunity with her today. Please let all your colleagues know who were not able to join us. This is recorded. We're going to make it available. The directors will have it. I hope it'll get distributed. I think it's something you might find useful sharing with community partners. I just feel like this is so wonderful that we have the opportunity to have this resource to help us sort of stop and take a minute to think about some of these really important things about how we're being affected by things and your work. And so I just wanted to take just a couple minutes of your time. And I wanted to also give one of our AAA directors an opportunity to share news with you about our legislative session, because there's good news there that I think is worth sharing today. But I just want to, it's really easy to be in your job, and your job is so important, and you're so focused on trying to do the best you can. And having worked at, I started out in an area agency back in 1990. So I've been around for a while and worked in different area agencies. And it's sometimes really important to just take a minute and think about how important your network is. There's 13 area agencies on aging. 2 of our area agencies are tribal. You're alike but different. Every AAA functions a little bit differently. You have a strong foundation. When you think about the Older Americans Act that was passed in 1965 and the area agencies that were added in 1973, you, through your agencies, have been doing really, really important work to support community members for like 50 years. That's a big deal. So we're mission driven. You're all here because you care about the work, and you care about the people that you serve. Many of you I know do clinical work because in addition to our foundation under the Older Americans Act, we do a very important work with the Medicaid system, and you're helping people stay at home. And I know I know a little bit about some of the stresses you face every day and the challenges that you have in the case management program. And it's made harder when funding is not available and your caseloads go up. And so I want to make sure that Lynn is able to share a little bit of news about what came out of this legislative session that we think will benefit, and it'll benefit the case management program. It's going to benefit our community network too, because we need resources going into the services that we need to provide for folks. So I'm going to introduce Lynn Kimball, who's the director for Aging and Long-Term Care of Eastern Washington.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Yeah, it was a very, very good session, and we really appreciate case managers who shared stories with legislators, who really, some of you came out and were able to advocate on Zoom or other platforms, writing letters to really drive in for a legislature how important case management is. And we had fallen so behind. Just the caseloads have become so unreasonable in many parts of our state. So we were really excited this session. We made some real historic wins. So area agencies on aging statewide are going to be working towards that 75-1. So really working intentionally around getting those caseloads down, really making sure we've got the right supports in place to support case managers wherever you are in the state, and really doing that work of how to get some of those supports, because the job is hard enough as it is, whether your caseload is 50 or it's 100, but we know just the unreasonableness that comes with those increasing caseloads and trying to plan your day, trying to respond to crises, and just trying to help people. And we're all passionate people who are really well-intentioned. We want to help our clients, we want to help the community, but we also know we have to take care of ourselves too. So we're excited about that. We're excited to be able to see some more resources coming in to support the work, because that's more people, more teams really helping to support people. We're also excited this session, we were able to see a huge increase in the personal needs allowance for people who are receiving care in their homes through Medicaid in-home care. So that rate goes up July 1st. So individuals will be able to keep right around $2,500 per month in income, which is well over the $1,000 per month we see today. So many clients statewide will no longer have participation. That participation, client responsibility, whatever it is, diminishes, goes away for a lot of people. So it also helps our clients a lot, those who are trying to balance limited incomes with trying to pay increasing rents, trying to balance caregiver hours, everything else. So we also anticipate we'll probably see some new clients coming on board too, because a lot of people really just were priced out of the system. Because when you got to pay rent, you got to pay rent, and then you try to find ways to work to keep yourself going. So I know those are just two. We had some other great things that weren't expected this session that came through with home delivered meals and other services, but we're just really, really happy and excited to just make sure there's more supports coming in. And just this is part of the role of our state association and W4A, and what we do is really trying to make sure there's resources coming to support the work, because it's really important work. So thank you for everything you do, and I will turn it back over to Kathy.
Thanks so much, Lynn. Yes, it's the investments in the long-term care system this legislative session will, you hear the term transformative. I do think that we've hit a high watermark, and it's great. What's so important is it signals the recognition and investment in our network and in our communities. So what I would like to do is just encourage you to share this good news with your colleagues. I hope that we will make this recording available to all of the AAAs. We hope you may find opportunities to use it in the future, to use all of the important messages that Laura shared today as a stepping off point for work you're doing within your local AAA to, just support yourselves and do this really important work together. And so whether you're in case management, or you're one of the fiscal people, or you're busy doing contracts, you all have a very important role to play in the network and in supporting community members in a variety of ways. So we're just glad that you were able to be with us today. And I'm seeing a question. So wage disparity. Well, we don't have the ability to answer those kind of specific questions today. This, as I said, much that we talked about today will be really good conversations for you to have with your local AAA director. And yes, you don't even have your contracts yet for this year, but we are looking at additional dollars that can be invested in the programs that you're a part of, that you're an important part of. Oh, and I see oh, hi, Patty. Do you have a question or a comment?
I do. I just want to thank you all for your lobbying for us, and especially that participation is going to be so important for our clients that we work with. I work in low-income housing, and it's a big barrier for people to getting the care they need. So thank you for that, and also for the funding for us. I just want to put it out there that there was case managers did go out, I think it was during your tenure, Kathy, and lobby on their own time for the case management program. And there's been ongoing, it's really difficult for us to do our job because we have a caregiver shortage. And so I have many people without caregivers, and I just want to put a thought in there. There's some conversation between our Protect 17 union and the union for caregivers to maybe have a lobby day that case managers and other folks such as yourself might want to attend, because we have a really severe shortage of caregivers, and I have many clients without caregivers. So I want to just put that out there. If anybody's interested, that's something we're looking at.
That's wonderful. Patty, that's one of our we talk about it a lot at the W4A meetings with the directors. And in sending information to Laura, one of the things I told her is that the work's stressful enough, but you can put together the greatest plan of care for somebody. And if you can't find the workers, if you can't find the services that people need, then they're not going to be able to stay in the community. And we're so aware of the shortage of, in personal care workers, and we have conversations regularly with the state. I'm really glad to hear that they're joining forces, and that I think that's a great opportunity. We continue to try to raise the visibility. Some of us had high hopes that the original initiatives at the federal level to bring greater attention to the caregiver workforce and elevating the importance of that work. But we're going to continue working on it at the state level. And that's going to be a critical piece for the future. We need some creative, innovative ways to be able to attract the people we need to do this important work.
Well, there's a lot of creativity, but without funding and support, that creativity is lost. And so I just want to encourage anybody who's interested in the specific action to connect with me. It's just in its starting phases. So
yeah,
That's great. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that information. I'll follow up with you about that, Patty. Well, it's just been wonderful to spend this time with you. I do hope that you found it giving you some good ideas, strategies, filling your heart a little bit, your soul with some of the support you need to do your work. And if there are any other questions, any other comments, we want to give you back your time. We just wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to hear the good news about some of the investments that are being made. From the state's perspective, this is the new baseline. We shouldn't have to start over every year. We need to build on it. And there needs to be continued investments in recognizing that we have people need support, wherever they are, and we need to be able to provide that support to them.
And any chance they're ever going to raise that $2,000 asset limit?
I do know that, so, it's interesting, the McIntosoa program that's being made possible under the Medicaid Transformation Project waiver. They're now preparing their application for the next 5 years. And they're looking at increasing income eligibility to 400% of the federal benefit rate, and looking at increasing the I guess is it the asset level? You folks who know this stuff better than I do. So that the resources. So in that model, which is a place to start, there's a recognition that we need to be allowing people to keep more resources. I do know that one of the things that ALTSA is planning on doing, they're right now in the middle of working on their decision packages for the next legislative session. And the new secretary for the Department of Social and Health Services is very much concerned with poverty reduction efforts. And so the entire department across all of its programs will be looking at that. One of the things they will be looking at is issues like that. And also like removing estate recovery, Carol, that would make a big difference too. If folks don't have to worry about estate recovery. So it isn't going to happen right away, but there's a recognition that there's things that could be done that if you view them as poverty reduction measures, they also allow people to maintain their dignity as they have those benefits in the community.
Well, it's especially tough on single people, widowed people. And it's been $2,000 since 1989. So, they can have more income than that now. But they, it just seems like they don't qualify if they have more than 42,000.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to put a plug in for that. It's one of my pet peeves.
Thank you. Well,
Thanks.
do any I want to offer the opportunity for anybody else that wants to make a comment. Let's see here. Yes. Finding increases in supports, absolutely need that. And yes, Maria's right. It was the story. The stories make the difference. And we will always come to you for the stories. We played, us, the area agencies on aging had a big role to play in getting that personal needs allowance raised, because we found so many times where there were people that needed services and didn't take them, couldn't take them because they couldn't pay the participation, their copay. And I think that as I was trying to gather stories about our, serving and supporting our clients, we were able to contribute, shared those stories. They were very powerful at one of the hearings with one of the legislative committees. So you have, in so many different ways, every time you share a story, we use it and we appreciate it, because that's what makes it real for people. Yes, we had great participation. Absolutely. We could do more virtual presentations. I think that's always fun. Send your ideas. This is, as I said, we're just seeing this as a kind of a jumping off point that you go back and at your AAA, with your director, with your team, you talk about things that you can support one another. And I see that Nicole has her hand raised. I want to give her an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Kathy. I just, first of all, wanted to thank Kathy Knight and Rebecca, our wonderful admin folks, and folks that helped us run the association and planning today's event. So thank you both very much for all of your efforts that went in today. And on behalf of the association, I just want to thank you all for the work that you do. Without you all, this work would not be possible. So just really grateful and appreciative of everything you do. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. I think that's a great way to end the day, to end the event. And yeah, I'll be talking to you, Irene, looking for some good ways that we can do more virtual presentations. I want to get back to where we can get together someday, but this was wonderful because we were able to have so many more people than we normally are able to have involved in these events. So thank you again for taking the time. We will make sure you have the recording, the resources. This is important stuff to share. Share it with others. It's really valuable information, helps all of us. Thank you.